Hey, Nathan. You're muted.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Just got off of one Zoom call and starting another.
I tell you, yesterday, it was all day long. So I'm gonna be listening, but I have to do some other work on my other computer. So I was paying attention. Hi, Doctor.
That's fine. Good morning, Dr. Fox.
Good morning. How's everybody?
Doing well.
I am great.
Good.
Is today a work group or is today a listen to a presentation, Dr. Fox?
It's going to be more of a listen to a presentation. There will be a couple opportunities to put stuff in the chat.
All right, great. I don't know if you know, but at our virtual recognition meeting on the 1st, we recognized Eaton Corporation for their inclusion and diversity program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would love to find out more about what they're doing.
Oh, it's incredible. I'll send you the write-up if you want to read it.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
They have these groups called IERGs. They're resource groups, and they encourage people to get engaged. I mean, they have about 10 resource groups for, African American, for LGBT, just all kinds, for women, for disabled veterans, for
LGBTQ
and allies. They say and allies. Dr. I don't know exactly what they mean by allies, but I guess that means people associated with that group in some way or identify.
Yeah, usually advocates, and some companies will split hairs on what that definition means between allies and advocates, but pretty much folks that are in the room for that group when they're not there, they advocate on their behalf.
Okay, all right.
Thermo Fisher is doing similar work with their groups. They have a number of diversity inclusion groups.
Cool, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to find out more.
They're probably way ahead of a lot of our local companies because I think Thermo Fisher has probably been doing it 5 or 6 years now.
Eaton started in 2012.
Oh, okay.
And they have a complete, if you just Google them, they have complete everything on their webpage.
Oh, okay. Okay, good.
Mm-hmm. That's a sad looking dog. Looks like he needs some food and some petting.
Yeah, that's my shepherd.
Is he happy?
He is. He comes to the office with me every now and then. That's why he's wearing a tie. So he's yeah, he gets a lot of food here at the office.
and the tie is in right colors.
It is. It's the yellow and the black. So it's got the little label on it at the front.
I love it.
Nathan, at the end of the presentation, it'd be great if you capture the the chat. It should send you a little email. Well, you probably know, but it'll send you an email with the chats in there. So I'm hoping we'll get some valuable information today.
Okay, I will try to do that.
I thought the award ceremony yesterday was, or Monday was, whenever the first was very good. I really enjoyed it. And it made me think, as part of my future project, several of the videos that we make should be interviewing various staff members with the work that they're doing, because some of the things that you all talked about, I wasn't aware of.
Are you referring to the workforce board
Right. Mm-hmm.
awards? Okay. We yesterday we provided we did more awards at the Land to Sky Board of Delegates, so we had back-to-back meetings there. So.
Oh, okay.
Dr. Fox, I think it's 9 o'clock.
All right, well, let's get started because we have a lot of information that we're going to cover today. And so we want to welcome each of you that are with us this morning. This has been a three-part series around our educational project. So I'm happy to see some familiar faces and some new faces and a good representation of folks with us today. So today we'll be talking about aligning educational objectives and outcomes to employers' work-based competencies. There will be a couple places where we will ask you to add some things, some of your thoughts in the chat area. And we will try to leave some time towards the end for any questions, but we do have a lot of information packed into our slides this morning. So we'll get started and go straight to our objectives. So we'll be looking at aligning educational objectives to employment competencies. And where that came from is as we're doing this work with My Future NC project around educational attainment that leads to gainful employment, one of the things we noticed was as we're getting folks in the same room, that they have different terminology. So part of that is just getting folks to have some of the same conversations around the same terminology. We'll look at how looking at our position requirements are tied to educational outcomes. So I'm a former department chair of business administration. And one of the things that I noticed was in working with my faculty, and particularly with professional development, was getting the faculty to look at job positions opening in our local industries and make sure that their classes use some of the same terminology around the outcomes and the objectives that they were using for students, so that when students started putting their resumes together, they're using the same terminologies that our employers are looking for in terms of their position requirements. So to develop competency-based positions descriptions. So on the other side of that, as employers are trying to align their work with graduates from colleges and universities, to make sure that they are looking at defining those positions based on the tasks that folks need to be able to do, the competencies, the knowledge, skills, and abilities. And then to align the performance appraisal systems to the competencies. So as we look at the next slide, we are, again, for anybody that's new with us this morning, we're working on the My Future North Carolina goal. Their goal is stated as they want to increase the total number of 25 to 44-year-old North Carolinians with a post-secondary credential or degree by 2 million by the year 2030. That there's been a predicted shortfall of 400,000 statewide. In the Land of Sky region, there's a shortfall predicted of 10,000 needed employees. And again, this is pre-COVID. As we go to the next slide, because of that, our local Land of Sky Regional Council, my Future North Carolina project, started creating some short-term goals that we wanted to work on to bridge that gap between what were predicted in terms of needs and what we had. So our first short-term goal was to provide recommendation regarding policy changes that would eliminate opportunity gaps, create a common workforce development vision, and enhance gainful employment, applying an equity lens. Now, there's a whole lot of meaning in that short-term goal. When you look at applying the equity lens, one of the things we're looking at is, as we predict our future workforce needs, is how do we target populations to get into the workforce that have traditionally been left out of the workforce. So that may be our reentry population that have criminal backgrounds. So how do we ban the box? How do we do it in such a way where we're not waiting for 5 years of a clear record or 7 years of clear record, but we're getting folks employed in low risk area quickly so that they don't reoffend. Or it may be our immigrant population. It may be our population from low wealth communities that may not have had access to the full job market, or just some of our organizational barriers, for example, applying 100% online for a job. On the other side of that, looking at the educational system and making sure that we are getting folks into non-traditional roles. If it's a female, looking at getting into engineering, or male nursing students, but aligning those common practices using the equity lens to make sure everybody has an opportunity to get into the workforce, to establish communications and networking opportunities for stakeholders. So part of what we're doing today is trying to bring together educational institutions, local government, local employers, to get everybody in the same room talking the same language. Number 3 is to build upon national best practices. So looking at not only regionally, but what's the national landscape around aligning the educational needs and credentials to what our employers are hiring from, and well as our local levels. And then to provide recommendation regarding alignment of specific workforce competencies, our human talents that are needed in order not only our current workforce, but our future workforce. So as we go to the next slide, we end up with 3 additional short-term goals to identify resources and tools that establish a seamless transition from educational institutions to gainful employment. So let me just pause here to say that we're currently in our implementation phase, or moving into implementation phase. We've had a year, thanks to the great folks of the John Belt Endowment, to really work with us around planning. We are now looking at, we have work groups in all of our strategic directional areas, where we are now looking at what groups are already out there. So there may be a number of community folks on our call this morning that are advocates for educational attainment and reducing or shortening that opportunity gap, because we're now going out into the community saying, okay, what group are you representing? How are you contributing to educational attainment, either in post-secondary or all the way down to pre-K programs? And how are you preparing folks for college and therefore gainful employment? To establish and examine talent management and talent acquisition through enhanced credentials. So one of the things we're looking at as we move into the implementation is not only the programs that are out there, but what are those programs of value that our employers are saying. So that's one of the things, if you're an employer on our call this morning, that you can share with us is, as you're hiring folks, what are the credentials that you're requiring as you look at competencies? Is it on the continuing educational side of the colleges, where folks are getting certifications, they're getting the skill sets they need? Is it on the curriculum side of the colleges, where you're looking at a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree, a master's level degree? So again, we know that we have some great educational institutions throughout our region, but we want to make sure that we're connecting with them and connecting them to our employers to make sure that we are offering the types of degrees, the programs, the credentials that they are hiring for based on competencies. And then to develop funding sources that leads to long-term strategic approach to funding our implementation. And so one of the questions I have been getting is, I've reached out to several advocacy groups, is around funding. And so, usually my response is, share with us what you are doing, your mission, the group that you're working with in terms of the age groups, and how are we preparing them for post-secondary credentials that lead to gainful employment? And so how can we align what you're doing and work with you to help you with all the resources that you need to be successful? And so we currently have an intern that's working with me, putting together a resource guide that will be a resource guide for not only our pre-K early educational folks, but also our K-12 folks, our community college and university folks, as well as our employers. But also it will be a guide that will have information in there for community-based organizations around faster completion. So how do you fill out your application for financial aid that leads to Pell Grants and scholarships? It will have some information in there for parents and parent groups. And so we're hoping for this to be a long-term strategic approach. So as we go to the next slide, we have looked at selected best practices. So based on our work, we have started to pull together best practices. And so this is just a short list of some of the best practices that we have started implementing and looking at as we move into implementation. So we're developing the development of a K-16 career pathway that aligns with students' aspirations and employers' needs. So one of the things we have to do for us to be successful in connecting our educational systems, our community advocacy groups, our local government, and our employers together is we've got to start having those pathways early, where we're building our pipeline. I do a lot of work around diversity and equity in our area. And inclusion, and a lot of what I hear from employers is we would love to be more inclusive, but we have challenges of having folks that we can recruit and retain in this area, diverse populations. One of our challenges is that the cost of living is higher than some of our larger cities. A second challenge may be that as we're looking to recruit diverse workforce, we don't have the cultural opportunities for folks that are moving into this area. We like to say that we're very diverse, but when we start looking at the cultural programs that are here, it's very difficult to recruit folks. And then a third would be if we are able to recruit a diverse worker, we may not be able to find employment for their spouse. And so one of the things we have to start looking at is how do we grow our own by reaching out to folks in our K through 16 career pathways. And so we'll look at some strategies around that towards the end of the presentation. A second best practice is a tier advising framework that provides a roadmap beginning in elementary schools with aligned with educational institutions and local employers. And so how do we create in our school system that alignment around career development? And so some of our schools are doing a really great job with this. United Way Community School Initiative is doing a great job with that. We're looking at how do we scale that up to get it into the high school populations that really focus on educational attainment, leading those folks to college, establishing a regional partnership in which pre-K, K-12, higher education, and private sector business and workforce leaders are represented in that alignment. So again, one of the reasons you're on this call today is to look at your area, whether you represent pre-K, K-12, higher education, local government, aligning what you do around the mission of making us successful as a region, educating folks, getting them into college or into diplomas or certificate program certifications that then lead to gainful employment. So part of that is connecting employers to educational partners that are looking at supporting career development or work-based learning experiences. And so we are looking at some best practices around internships, apprenticeships. If it's a younger population where you may not be able to actually do an apprenticeship with younger population, how do we do virtual tours? How do we get them into the plants to see what's occurring with the work you're doing? And then targeting special populations such as reentry, veterans, immigrants, and students that are economically or academically at risk. And then finally, to revise educational placement policies and practices that impede education to employment pipeline. So again, these are just some selected best practices. We have a table of about 13 pages at this point that we are going back and refining and sharing bits and pieces of it with our specific work groups in that particular area to say, okay, let's look at some best practices that we have gleaned from folks in the workplace, and let's see how we align those to really improve what we're doing within our workforce. Now, I will say one of the things that we are also looking at is policy and what policy changes need to be made. So as our work groups are working in each of these areas, pre-K, K-12, post-secondary education, employers, aligning our workforce, we all are looking at what policy changes do we need to implement, as well as we're looking at what funding do you need that we might be able to advocate on your behalf to make your programs very successful. So as we go to the next slide, this is your chance. So I want you to take just a couple of minutes and in the chat room, list any best practices that you can think of that would assist in connecting the attainment dots from pre-K initiatives to gainful employment in our region. So take about 2 minutes, and in the chat, let's put some things there around best practices that you are familiar with or that's working well for you. So we'll give you 1 more minute.
We have about over 30 people on the call, so we need some more input in the chat. So please give us your best practice, your wonderful ideas.
Okay, we are getting some really good information and suggestions, so keep those coming. And I think I saw one that popped in early, Family Forward, and I'm not real familiar with them, but that when I was reading that, it sparked a thought. We are doing some good things around our partnerships as you all are sharing those opportunities up there. and some of the job shadowing, and I saw virtual tours, so some really good things. And that's really confirmation for some of our work groups, because they're having some of those same conversations. But as I saw that family forward, one of the things that I know that one of our superintendents shared with us as we were talking about best practices was really getting into the communities and making sure that parents understood and connected early. So I'm happy to see a lot of the practices folks are listing there, but I also want to think about how do we get into our local communities and how do we partner with parents groups and community-based groups to get the information out there. I know that one of the speed bumps that one of our work groups is running into with our FAFSA completion, our free application for financial aid, is just getting the homework done. I think that's one of our best examples of getting community involved. Is with the FAFSA piece, one of the challenges we are running into is parents being distrustful of some of the information that has to be that's added to the application, as well as just help in filling out the application. So as we think about this, I think the more successful programs are going to be just not only in alignment from the educational piece, but also community-based organization. So thank you, and keep those coming. So as we go to the next slide, our Chamber of Commerce, in connection with our Workforce Development Board and several other organizations, did a survey a few years back, and it came out, was published in 2018, and they looked at potential growth areas. So as we are thinking about our alignment and looking at our educational opportunities, we also have to be looking at where are we hiring from? What areas are our potential growth? So they listed these following areas: manufacturing, restaurant, lodging, and hospitality services, public sector and education, professional and technical services, retail industry, construction and skilled trade, healthcare and social assistant industry, energy, utilities and clean tech, IT, software and analysis, logistic, transportation, and warehousing. So hopefully, if you're on the call, you find yourself somewhere in one of these groups. And so as we think about the alignment and the piece that you just put into the chat, think about how you can build upon what you're already doing well to make sure that you are getting those employees that you need, and things that you can do differently that you may not have thought about. And so, again, as a past department chair, one of the things I tried to encourage my faculty was to not only connect with the students that were in the classroom, but also the local employers that they were preparing those students to go work for. And it's difficult, and that becomes a policy issue when we start looking at faculty teaching loads and how much time do they have to actually be out in the community and connecting to folks. So again, we're looking at some of those issues. So as we go to our next slide, there's some takeaways. So one of the takeaways that we have identified is we have to be able to align educational programs to current and future employment growth areas. So as we're moving to the implementation stage, for those of you that are in the employment arena, we'll be reaching out to you to say, okay, this was the 2018 report. Can you verify now, dealing with COVID-19, that these are still fast growth areas within your organizations? If not, what are those growth areas? and how can we connect you better, align your practices better with the folks that are preparing your employees to make sure that we are meeting those needs. What are the positions that you are projecting not only in the short term, but in the long term around that you'll be hiring in? What are the credentials, the skill sets, the competencies you have identified with that? And so again, not just leaving it up to your HR folks, your human resources management folks, but also connecting it to those hiring managers that really are in tune with the competency needed. A second takeaway as we have started this work is aligning educational objectives and outcomes to needed employees' competencies. And we're going to talk a little bit more in just a second around what that means. But getting our folks on the educational side using the same terminology as our employers, enhancing ongoing communication channels with local employers. So I know that our employers are busy. I know that our educators are busy. But at some point, we got to carve out some time for us to be connecting and talking with each other around our needs. Enhancing community marketing of educational programs. So I just saw a chat, something pop up in the chat around educating our communities and our parents. And so that's one of our challenges, is to be getting out there. Now, I will tell you, because of the work I do around diversity and inclusion, what I hear from a lot of employers is we don't know how to connect with folks in the community, because as an employer, we're somewhat in our bubble of every day, our standard operating procedures are getting the work done. So how do we connect with folks? How do we find folks to have these conversations with? How do we reach that target market in terms of our messaging? And so we have to be more inclusive in how we message, the message we put together, not only from the educational point of view to say, we value educating everyone in our community. Here are resources to assist folks as they move through the educational pipeline, but also on the employment side, making sure that we're just not putting stuff on our websites, and we're not just using our standard way of marketing our open positions, but really getting that information out there. Another takeaway is we've got to be looking at credentials of values. And so I know that we have a work group at the state level looking at credentials of values. That's one of the things I will be working with our intern, is looking at aligning our growth areas to skill sets needed. And then really, how do we market the credentials, the programs that our colleges are offering, our high schools are offering, our middle schools are offering. So again, those career pathways. And then identifying needed resources to implement an attainment model. So again, thinking outside of the box around funding of our programs. And so we may not be able to fund everybody's initiative, but looking again at those best practices that really align educational attainment to gainful employment, removing any organizational barriers and challenges, and finding funding that makes their program sustainable. And then the final takeaway is implementing best practices for that alignment. Having everybody working in a strategic, comprehensive model. I will tell you, our region is doing really well around pulling together this attainment model, where we have identified key stakeholders. We are identifying community-based programs that are doing some of the work at the ground level. Now, the gap that we are also identifying is that some employers are not even aware of some of these programs. And in some cases, some of our educational institutions are not aware of some of the work that has taken place. So part of our challenge is sharing that information and getting folks talking. Our next slide then gets us to the strategic goal for this particular piece, the alignment piece. So as we move to the next slide, again, we have 4 or 5 strategic goals. Today, we're looking at the alignment goal. So to ensure that 90% of North Carolina's adults ages 25 to 44 in the labor force obtain the necessary credentials that aligns with needed employees' competencies. Now, again, a lot of wording there, but really saying, what do we need to be doing to prepare our adult population at this point? So again, we have strategic goals for our pre-K, early childhood education programs. We have a strategic goal for our K-12 folks. We have a strategic goal around post-secondary attainment. Today, we're looking specifically, though, at this strategic goal around the adult population. So we're not forgetting the other parts of our pipeline, but our focus today is on that 25 to 44-year-old labor force that we can get immediately in the workforce. So my future North Carolina education performance indicators to say that we are moving the needle, to give us some benchmarks, is to start looking at labor market alignment. And what does that look like? So what are the labor market gaps that we can help fill in? How do we connect our disconnected youth to get them into the pipeline that leads to gainful employment? What jobs are out there that that's paying a sustainable wage where families can thrive within our region? And then finally, the educational and workforce competency alignment. So that's a lot, and that's a lot of work for one specific strategic area. But we feel like we can get this work done in our region. So as we go to the next slide, so how do we start tackling some of these issues where we're speaking the same language? So, just to share with you briefly, kind of my experience, I retired, took early retirement from the North Carolina Community College system almost 6 years ago now, after being in the North Carolina community system for 24 years, and then in the South Carolina 2-year system for 5 years. One of the things I noticed when I left the South Carolina system and came back to the North Carolina system was that the South Carolina system was big on outcome-based learning and student learning outcomes. Now, North Carolina has caught up with them, but at that point, when I came back and particularly became a department chair, we were only as a state beginning to have really heavy, and I should say at least at the 2-year college level, conversations around student learning outcomes and really defining those in a meaningful area in which it was tied directly with the workforce. So when we talk about student learning outcomes, again, to try to have some common language for our folks that are employers, on the educational side, these are the specific or specified knowledge, skills, and abilities or attitudes that students are expected to attain by the end of their learning experience or program of study. Now, what that means is, and it should sound very similar to the definitions that our HR folks are talking about around competency and task, or knowledge, skills, and ability needed to do a task or to do the job. As we're looking at that, it has an implication that our instructors are talking to our local employers to say, what specific knowledge, skills, and abilities are you looking for when you hire our graduates? So employers may be saying competencies. Educational folks may be saying student learning outcomes, but you're really talking the same language when you define those around specified knowledge, skills, and abilities or attitudes that students need to do the work. Now, I saw in the chat that somebody mentioned those soft skills, and that's where that attitude piece comes in to play. So most colleges teach some type of professional development course that's tied directly into those soft skills that our employers are saying our students need, our graduates need as they are getting into the workforce. One of the things I heard from my advisory committees was your students are graduating, your graduates are graduating with the technical skills. And again, I've been out of the as a full-time person 5 or 6 years now. So 6 years ago, folks were saying they're graduating with the skills set. If it's an accounting student that we're hiring to work in our finance department, they know accounting, they know bookkeeping, they know generally accepted accounting practices and principles, but they're lacking some of that soft skills around communication skills, critical thinking skills, problem solving skills, being able to work as a team. And so student learning outcomes, most programs now have built in some of those soft skills that employers are looking for. So one of the things we will be doing kind of as a follow-up, we'll also be reaching out to folks in the employment side to say specifically what soft skills are you looking for. Now this definition comes from Georgia Tech. And I'm sorry, folks, I will say that I'm a big North Carolina Chapel Hill Tar Heel fan. My sister graduated from Chapel Hill. I have several cousins there. But as I was looking for sources to share with you all, Georgia Tech's assessment toolkit around developing student learning outcome statements, the wording around that was pretty comprehensive. So as we go to the next slide, you'll see that they suggest using Bloom as most folks are. But again, from the employer's part of having the same language, this is how the educational side started developing their student learning outcomes around the wording that they use in student outcomes and objectives. So they talk about on the very introductory level is and a lot of colleges will have an introductory class in their programs. So this is where it's getting everybody that shared experience around defining common terminology, describing practices. You will note that when you go from remembering and where students are just regurgitating information to the very high level, create, this is where they're doing stuff. And so a lot of times in their capstone programs, their capstone courses, and most educational institutions now have a capstone course where everything they've learned over the 2 years or 4 years or 1 year certificate program is that higher level doing. So this is where they talk about assembling and constructing and developing and designing and planning and producing, where that student should be able to now demonstrate their understanding of all the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they've been learning in that program that then directly aligns with the knowledge, skills, and abilities that the employer is looking for. And so this is where it gets important for educational institutions to be having outreach to their local business folks to say, okay, we have some introductory courses, we have some courses that then build upon the knowledge, skills, and abilities in these introductory courses. But by the time they get to their final course, their capstone, tell us what they should be doing in the workforce. What should they how should they be doing a live project? And so, for example, my lead accounting folks that taught auditing would have their auditing class do an audit project, so that as they're applying for a job in accounting, specifically in auditing, they have audit records. So again, tying together what we're doing. So as we go to the next slide, our student learning objectives are brief statements that describe what students will be expected. So we have the outcomes and we have the objectives. The outcomes are the things that they should be able to do when they finish a class, when they finish a program, where the objectives are the things that they are doing to reinforce. So student learning objectives reinforces student learning outcomes. So as we go to the next slide, I want to give you an example. And again, my background is a department chair of business administration. And so a lot of my examples are going to be business related or management leadership related. But the student learning outcome may say at the completion of the course, the learner should be able to develop a strategic operational plan. So again, if we're talking to our employers that are hiring folks, particularly in the business areas as project managers, et cetera, this is where this learning objective would have, outcome would have come from. So then the student learning objectives should reinforce how we measure whether or not they're meeting that outcome. So they should be able to differentiate between external and internal variables that impact an organization. Now think about that. If you're the employer and you're hiring folks, particularly in management positions, leadership positions, or even human resources management positions, you want them to be able to look at their ecosystem, the systems around your operations, to be able to determine things that are internally happening with your company versus externally, what things you can control, how do you get cost under control, etc. Describe critical assumptions related to the resource-based view of internal analysis. So how do you do an internal analysis where you're looking at everything within your organization to say, these are our strong points, these are the things that are our challenge, and then what do we need to do? And then conduct a SWOT analysis, looking at your strengths, your weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So again, sometimes we don't have this conversation with our employers if we're the educators, but these are the type of conversations that department chairs and lead instructors are having internally in their department to make sure that they are preparing their graduates for the competencies needed to do the task. And so we need to do a better job, I personally think, from an educational point of view, of sharing how we are coming up with the courses that we offer. Hopefully we're looking at the needs of our local employers, and we're offering courses that that lead to gainful employment. Within the courses, looking at what specific competencies we need to build into that course that aligns with everything that we're doing around the leading to gainful employment. So as we go to the next slide, we talk about from the human resource, so from the business side, so that's from the educational side. Again, speaking the same language. So from particularly a human resources management / training and development side, we talk, instead of saying student learning outcomes and objectives, we say instructional objectives, particularly if we work in the area of training and development. So the purpose, we define that as the purpose and expected outcome of training activities. So again, internally, we're looking at the skill sets that we need, the competencies, and we are looking for, we're doing a gap analysis around our current level of employees and their knowledge, skills, and abilities, and our needs within our jobs. And then our training, our internal training programs are to fulfill the gaps in our needs. Instruction from a human resource management point of view, and again, employer side, is defined as the characteristics of the environment in which learning is occurring. Now, of course, from an educational side, we're talking about the student learning outcomes in the class. And then again, from the business side, instructional system designs is a process for designing and developing our training programs. So this is coming from an actual class that I teach for a training and development course. And this is the book I use by Raymond Noe. But again, having that common conversation. And then as we go to the next slide, finally, we define employees' competencies as the knowledge, skills, and abilities and other job characteristics needed to successfully complete tasks that make up employment positions. So again, if you're hearing the words there, competencies are what we generally talk about from the employer's point of view. Student learning outcomes and objectives are what we usually term it with the educational institutions. But note that both definitions talk about knowledge, skills, and abilities. So we're using the same measure stick around making sure we're preparing folks. We're just not aligning that and having those conversations more often between our educational providers, but also our community-based organizations. So if we're a community-based organization, let's take, and not wanting to pick on anybody, but I'm a big advocate for the United Way's community school initiatives. So as they are having some of their conversations, they are having some of those same conversations with parent groups around educational foundations and supporting students, and how does that look, and what's that environment we're creating, particularly right now with the virtual environment. And we notice in the news that students nationally are falling behind more and more with virtual learning. So if we know that during this COVID-19 pandemic, what resources are we putting in place to assist with and foster online learning, particularly at the lower levels? But we're talking the same language. So as we go to the next slide, and we'll get there in a second. Sometimes it freezes up. Okay, so I pulled this slide from a presentation around learning outcomes and assessment. And this was out of Massachusetts public colleges and universities. So I'm going to share with you several slides from their presentation around cultural assessment and aligning these pieces we've been talking about. So looking at student learning outcome assessment, they said that you can't do this in just a bubble, in isolation. So learning outcomes is important, and they go on to say that it's not only important for the student population. So again, that's one of the reasons we're in our implementation plans, we're looking at connecting with student advocacy groups, In Buncombe County, we have my father taught me that, my sister taught me that. Libby Cowles has a group that develop young leadership and go into the school systems and advocate on behalf of students that may be falling behind or some discrepancies that we may be seeing. So we've got to connect that piece. And again, United Way's community school program is great, but also connecting that to faculty and making sure that faculty understand not only their disciplines and what the employer needs, but also the communities that the students are coming from. And that's, we have some work to do in that area. You know, I had a lead economic instructor once tell me, and this was not in this area, so several folks on the call know me and know me well and know some of the places I've taught. So let me just say, one of my first teaching jobs, I had a co-worker that was our lead economic instructor. And he said to me one day, he was getting bad performance appraisals in the classroom from students. And he made a comment around, well, if students can't understand economics, I'm not dumbing down my presentation. We want students to walk out that are going to graduate from our programs that are going to be higher performing employers. And I said, that is our goal, but part of our goal is to meet students where they are and to get them to the level where they need to be that will set them up for gainful employment. I said, you know, John, you are a very bright person. You are highly educated from an Ivy League university. You know your economics, you know your stuff. But we have students that are coming to us from low wealth communities and immigrants that have an opportunity gap, not an achievement gap. Now, a lot of times we like to say achievement gap, but it's an opportunity gap where they had a lack of resources to prepare them for educational attainment and success. I said, so I'm not saying you need to dumb down your presentations, but look at the wording that you're using in the classroom where students are having to look up the word before they understand the economic theory. You're bright enough to be able to change the words you're using to a word that they know, but still teach elasticity of demand or whatever it is that you're teaching. And he literally looked at me and said, well, if they don't know the word that I'm saying, they need to spell it as best they can and go look it up. And I said, but if they're spending their time looking up words that really don't have anything to do with economics, then they're not going to be successful and you're going to continue to get poor evaluation. So part of looking at preparing our workforce is to realize that everybody has not had the same opportunities and to provide those resources and those opportunities to get everybody on the same page. We also have to look at taxpayers. We have a duty to our taxpayers to be educating our students at every level and providing them opportunities to be successful in employment. Employers have a responsibility of hiring the higher performance employees, making our region very prosperous for our area. And then we have a responsibility around state and government and some of the programs that they support. Locally, we are fortunate to have our local government looking at creating strategic planning and working with our pre-K and elementary programs, et cetera. And then federal government programs around accreditation, making sure that students are getting the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be gainfully employed, providing free financial aid and access to other information. And then we have our employers are a major component to this. But if we're not involving them with some of this conversation, they're not aware of the caliber of students our institutions are letting out and graduating. So as we go to the next slide, again, from the same study, we started looking at trying to align educational competencies and outcomes. And so this particular study and again, this was 2016, 2017, their specific goals that they have in their area was to foster a more integrated system of public higher educational capable of responding to local and statewide needs. So again, one of the things I'll share with you is as we are doing this work with the Land of Sky, My Future North Carolina project initiative of educational attainment that leads to gainful employment, we have pulled best practices from other schools and other areas. And so we've looked at how do we create this alignment. And so that's one of the reasons we're doing this session today, to elevate performance of public higher education. So, again, credentials of values, and are we providing students with the necessary resources to be gainfully employed? Developing better integration with P12 and workforce sectors. So again, this work is not being created and developed in isolation. This is not anything new. That there's other states been doing that. We have the opportunity in our region to do it better than some other states have been doing. Enhancing appreciation of higher education. This is one of the things, the areas that we're really working on in our implementation around community knowledge and community education. I can tell you as a male of a Dr. Hugh, going through our educational system, growing up, particularly, and again, I can only share my experience. It's going to be different based on who you talk to, but education in my community was not valued as much as it should have because of system bias. And I remember in the early days of education, particularly, and as I approach, the 60-year-old mark, I grew up in Tryon and went into the public school system at the time of integration. My older brother and my older sister, for the most part of their education, was in segregated schools, and so some of the hand-me-downs things that the Black school system received, the lack of funding that they received, created a system bias around the value of education. And then the problem that we continue to see was as we integrated, and my mother particularly was very staunched on her kids getting an education. Now, I can tell you, particularly by the time I got to high school, I had friends that looked like me that said, you're trying to be better than everybody else because you're taking college prep courses. Who do you think you are? Particularly as I got into college and would come home, there was a stigma attached to that. So we're having to undo some cultural biases that were created by system biases in communities that sometimes our faculty members may not recognize, or our employers may not recognize. I recall being in a staff meeting where we received, I did a grant to get bus passes for students, low wealth community students that did not have automobiles, cars to get back and forth to campus. And I had a coworker say to me, well, students can't afford a $10 bus pass, they don't need to be here. And I had to take a pause, and I said, we have students that I personally know that are walking to class to get here to take a class. We have students that have to decide if they're going to buy a bus pass this month versus skipping a meal. And so we have to understand and have that, foster that appreciation in our communities around the value of education, and that you too can be successful. And then they look at incubating innovation to ensure high quality, better access, and more affordability. So we're also looking at that piece. So as we go to that next slide, we started looking at what that really means from a system point of view. I'm all about systems and models. And so from the employer's point of view, we started talking about a job analysis. The job analysis is the process of studying jobs in order to gather, analyze, synthesize, and report information about job requirements and rewards. Now, part of my background has been in human resources. I have the PHR certification from SHRM, the Society of Human Resources Management. I have been an interim HR manager, director for at one of the community colleges that I taught human resources management courses at. I've been an executive director for a nonprofit. So when I talk about HR issues, usually I'm coming from an experience base of my personal experience. My personal experience has been in the past, we have not done a good job with job analysis, where we have really studied the jobs that then leads to the competencies that we are defining. So a lot of times when we talk about job positions, we have just passed down that position from one year to the next without going back and saying, okay, what has changed within the jobs that folks are doing, the task that they're doing, the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need, and have we updated the position description around that? And then have we actually tied that to our performance appraisal system to evaluate what we say folks should be doing in their job, looking for the gaps, but also including an improvement plan to improve that set of skills that may be lacking. And then the final piece that we haven't done a good job with is reconnecting to our educators to say, hey, folks, we're finding that there's a gap in some of the skills, knowledge, and abilities that we have in our employees. This is what we need you to focus on in some of your programs. So part of that problem in the past, and again, I will say not every company is guilty of this. Some companies are doing outstanding jobs around doing job analysis, reviewing those jobs, and going back annually to make updates and tying that to position descriptions, tying that to performance appraisals, and tying that to career and professional development, formal career and professional development programs. So closing that loop. Job requirements are a job requirement job analysis. So most of the folks that, if you work in HR, you know that there are different types of job analysis that you can do. Today, we're going to just talk a little bit about the job requirement job analysis. It seeks to identify and describes the specific task, the knowledge, skills, and abilities, and other job characteristics needed to do a particular job. Now, the problem is sometimes we don't do a good job with this because it takes time, manpower, hours, workforce hours, I should say, to be more inclusive, workforce hours to do a thorough job analysis that is based on job requirements. In most cases, we have budgeted our HR departments, or we may not even have an HR department. So we're asking folks that may not have that background in HR to look at and analyze a job based on the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other job characteristics to do that job. We are asking folks then to tie that to position descriptions. Now, I will tell you what normally happens is a hiring manager says, oh, I need to hire 3 folks on the floor in this manufacturing plant. Go ahead and advertise this. Well, what normally happens is somebody in HR pulls the last position that we advertised in that. They send it to the hiring manager. The hiring manager kind of glance at it. Oh yeah, that looks good. But nobody really reviews it annually to see what has changed in that position that we're now hiring for. And we haven't connecting it to the folks that are training folks in the educational system to do the job. So this comes from a staffing course that I teach for a local college, and the book that I use is a really good book. As we go to the next slide. So I'm a visual person. So what we're really talking about, and so I will say to you, as a former department chair, I'm sure I drove some of my instructors crazy, because I had worked in HR before, or actually during my college teaching years. And so I was seeing a disconnect with what we were saying in the classroom to what my advisory committees were saying with the folks that they were hiring. And so my faculty talked a lot around what is it that really the terminology that we should be using to prepare students. So when we talk about the job requirements, job analysis, it starts by looking at doing a job analysis and identifying the outcomes, the results that we want. It starts by looking at identifying the jobs that we're going to look at, identifying within those the tasks that are needed, the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other job characteristics that it takes. Those other job characteristics may be some of those soft skills that we talk about: teamwork, communications, work ethic, some of those soft skills, critical thinking, problem solving. It results in our job descriptions and our job specifications. So a lot of times if I was working with my students, my faculty around their developing their course syllabi, I would look at positions in our local markets as to what they were requiring. And I would say, okay, let's look at, can we have an outcome, a student learning outcome related to this? Can we have a student learning outcome related to this over here? And trying to bridge that. So as we go to the next slide, and we're talking about really trying to align that educational program to the employer's position descriptions, it's important for us to have this conversation on the educational side, but also with our business partners and our local economic development partners. Now, the local economic development folks, where that comes into, is they're recruiting or trying to recruit companies to our areas, and they're trying to retain those companies in our areas. So they want to make sure that we are preparing a workforce for that local industry. Some companies and some local economic developers do a better job than others. Now, in our area, I tend to think we're doing a good job. Now, I will give you some practical experience of how I saw this play out when I was working in South Carolina. I was working at Spartanburg Tech, which is now Spartanburg Community College, when BMW moved into that area. And so I was the lead management instructor, teaching all of our HR classes, teaching our labor union relations courses, our compensation courses, our benefits and compensation, our staffing compensation. So this actually comes from a compensation class, benefits and compensation class that I've taught, and this is the book that I use. But we actually met with the local economic developer in Spartanburg, South Carolina, called a group of our faculty together and department chairs and said, we are trying to recruit BMW to the Greer-Greenville area of South Carolina. We want to make sure our educational institutions are preparing graduates to meet their needs from all levels of employment, from cutting grass and sweeping the floors to top management. And they said, so they brought all the colleges, the local colleges together, 4-year as well as 2-year institutions. And so as they did that, we started looking at the internal work relationships around not only what we were preparing students to do, but what our local companies were, their needs were. And so they gave us a list of their jobs that they were going to be hiring for. And I don't know if you know the background of BMW. They were on the ground 2 or 3 years prior to even groundbreaking on the plant. So they were already having, for 2 to 3 years prior to groundbreaking, we're having conversations with local economic developers, with local educators to say, do you have the workforce here that we're going to need for these specific jobs? So the job analysis, according to this particular book, it was the systematic process of collecting information that identifies the similarities and differences in the work. With my faculty, I asked them to do a job analysis of their programs. So within our programs, how systematic are we around making sure that we're offering the course offerings that students need to get a job in this particular field? What certificates do we offer that are certificates of values, where, for example, my lead accounting instructor said, we, at that time, we have an accounting 1 and accounting 2 certificate. And okay, so what does that prepare a student to do? So we actually started looking at job descriptions, so a report that identifies, defines, and describes the jobs that are actually performed. And I said, okay, so within, if somebody got a 1-year certificate, can they do this job based on this job description? And so we really refined what we were offering based on, again, that one example of hiring folks in accounting. And that leads to our job evaluations. So again, making sure we are providing what are needed, and that becomes our job structures. So some major decisions of job analysis: who performed the job analysis within the company, what information is needed, who is involved, and where you are going to connect that, and how useful is that information. Hopefully we're having those conversations with our local employers, with our economic development people, with our educational providers, and with our communities. So that within our communities, we're saying, you have the opportunity to get an education in these areas. And this is where our growth is. And this is the salary range in terms of gainful employment, a living wage that you can expect. If we go to the next slide, there are a couple of tools that you can start looking at to start aligning your conversation. So connecting the dots of educational attainment to gainful employment. ONET is one that a lot of HR folks will use in terms of position descriptions. They do a really good job in industry based and categories of job. If we go to the next slide, one that folks may not be as familiar with is our billing block model. And they have several models, I should say. But this is coming from Career One Stop. And so I'll give you a citation here. I didn't give you all of the stuff that they do here, but I wanted to kind of give you an idea. And I do professional and executive coaching for several clients. And one of the things I've started doing is, because of my HR background, is if we're working on their resumes, usually we go to this site to make sure that they are using the same terminology that employers are hiring for. So a lot of times I'll say, let's not use your traditional headings for your resumes. If we know that HR folks are hiring employees based on knowledge, skills, and abilities, then let's have a heading, knowledge, and that's where you put your educational degrees. Let's have a heading that says abilities, and let's go to this building block model and let's pull the competencies that they list here by your industry that you're seeking to be employed in. And let's look at the programs and studies you have, and let's use those same wordings that we know the employers are hiring for. So this is sponsored by the U.S. Department of Labor. There are 3 tiers that they identify. So some of you that are talking about some of those soft skills, they have tier 1 that identify personal effectiveness competencies. So again, from the educational point of view, if you're an educator, take a look at some of those soft skills that the Department of Labor has said that the Department of Labor has said are needed in jobs, and particularly industries. And I will tell you, the foundational model is used in every building block. So if you're talking about medical, you're gonna, if you go to this site and you go to medical industry, they're gonna start with the personal effectiveness competencies, and they're gonna list those soft skills. And they're going to do it in a way that if you're writing, if you're on the employer side of it, they're going to write it in such a way that you can pull that to write your position descriptions. If you're on the educational side of it, you can look at those, and then they can become your student learning outcomes and objectives that you're building in to make that alignment around connecting those educational dots. If you are a community-based organization, working with youth and young adults towards educational attainment and preparing them for college, these are some of the soft skills you can build into your training programs to make sure that that alignment is there. If you're in manufacturing, it's still going to start with those tier 1 personal effectiveness. So it spans all of the different areas of folks that are on the call today that you're hiring for. It will have us tier 2, which is the academic competencies. So this list will list the specific skill sets that from an academic side of the house that you should be gaining. And then tier 3 is the specific workplace competencies needed. The other reason I like this site and this toolkit is they give you a credential competency worksheet. That we will probably start using as we move to implementation. So credential competencies list the competencies by that specific industry. So IT, medical, construction, manufacturing, etc. And the worksheet will has a column for you to measure whether or not you're seeing those competencies show up in your area. It will then list, has a column where it will list the credentials needed, or you can say whether or not those credentials are there. The curriculum analysis worksheet looks specifically at skill sets around curriculum. The employer competency need assessment worksheet looks at skill sets that the employer needs. And it looks at, it allows you to measure whether or not those competencies are being found in your current workforce or not. So that again, from your training and development point of view, you know where those gaps are to start implementing training. But it also gives you that opportunity to reach out to your local educational institutions to say, hey folks, this is where we're finding a gap. How can you help us? What are some short-term strategies? What are some long-term strategies? Is this something that your curriculum area can implement? Or is this area of your continuing education that you can implement? Is this something that your customized industry section of your college can implement on a short-term basis where you come in and do some training for us? And then it has a gap analysis worksheet. And then finally, it has a certification. Well, I shouldn't say finally, because there's much more on these websites, but it also has a certification finder. So if it is a new potential employee in our area, or a community person or adult that has some college but not completed, they can go and look at certifications that various colleges offer. Now, it doesn't drill down to individual colleges, but it will say, here are some certifications folks can get in this particular area. This is it connects those dots around quickly getting into the workforce. So if we're a goodwill training industry, for example, we might look at these certifications and say, hey, how do we connect with Con Ed for this particular college, or create this certificate training within our area to get folks quickly gainfully employed. So as we go to the next slide, we start looking at aligning best practices. So if we can get folks in the same room, having some similar conversations, we then start saying, okay, what are some best practices? One of the ones, so this, starting with this one, involve all stakeholders in establishing a pre-K to gainful employment attainment model. So this is one that we really started looking at. And so we have folks on the call today from every one of these areas. But looking at aligning pre-K and early childhood educational partners and looking at the value that they bring to us, and making sure, our college instructors, and I'll say this because I've been one, sometimes we have these, we operate in isolation, where we sometimes are not having those conversations with our pre-K folks to say, it is important to make sure that as we're preparing folks for ultimately gainful employment, they are getting the basic foundation that they need, not only academically, but socially and mentally and behaviorally, to be successful in the classroom as they get into our K-12 programs. And this is the pathways that we need to be creating. So pre-K early childhood education partnerships must occur. K-12 educational partners, aligning our post-secondary partners, looking at our community educational advocacy groups, looking at our employers and our economic developers, our local government, and our workforce development boards. And we've got to start saying, what are the best practices that you are doing that other folks may just not be aware of? How do we connect those dots? And so that's kind of our project, is kind of a clearinghouse of some of these best practices. A second, so going to the next slide, a second best practices, and again, we're not giving you all of these are the top 3 that I just kind of picked from our charts, but use local companies' leadership and educational advisory committees members for each program offered by educational institutions. Now, again, notice that on this slide, I just say educational institutions. I have not tried to separate our pre-K programs, early childhood education program, K-12 programs from our college programs. Any aspect of education, we should be talking to our company leaders to make sure that alignment is there. Even, and I saw in the chat earlier that somebody said something about making sure managers, companies are building that bridge of career development early in that child's educational system. So using company leaderships and companies, I hate to tell you this, you got to give your managers some time to get out there in the communities, to connect to folks. And so some of the ways I wanted to give you some strategies. I don't like just throwing out some ideas there around this is what we should be doing, but to give you some practical strategies. So assist with curriculum development programs. So how are we bringing in managers and company leaders and economic developers and chamber folks to say, hey, this is what we're hearing from our employers. So as you're developing your pre-K programs, as you're developing your K-12 programs, as you're developing post-secondary programs, these are some things you need to do. And you know, the pushback that I've gotten over the 30 years of doing this work has been, well, folks, you know, I'm a manager of a company. What can I say to pre-K students? Think about the soft skills that we're saying are not showing up in our workforce now. I can tell you the last few years of actually teaching full time, particularly with more and more online courses, I saw students say things to other students in discussion forums that they probably would not have said face to face to people, just because they were hiding behind technology. So how do we develop in pre-K programs and early childhood education programs, and our elementary schools and elementary schools that positive human relation skills? So as a manager, you can talk about how to even young kids, how important it is to get along with each other, how important it is to share things, share your toys, share your information. So there are strategies that we need to be looking at, particularly if we're finding that we have difficulty recruiting workers to this area. We got to build our workforce from our pipeline. I have friends that when I first moved back to this area said, why are you moving back to the Western North Carolina area? Your salary is so much higher if you stay in this area of the country. You know, and I have been asked by folks, well, you know, we're trying to be more inclusive in our hiring. How did you end up back here? Well, I ended up back here because I grew up here. My grandmother was very ill and was actually dying, and my mother was killing herself trying to be her full-time healthcare provider 24/7. And so I moved back not for an employment position, really. After being gone for almost 20 years, I moved back to help with the family. But folks that look like me, it's harder to recruit them to this area. If you know, I was able to move back to this area, move into my childhood home, not have a mortgage, not have a lease, not have rental payments. Therefore, I could take a cut in pay to move back to this area. If we're trying to recruit professionals to this area that are not based in this area, and we look at housing costs, and we look at child care cost, and we look at the cost of food, and we look at our salary level, we're not going to be able to recruit the type of folks. So how do we align our curriculum development from pre-K all the way to post-secondary to build that workforce that we need in our area? How do we review courses offering to ensure alignment with industry? So again, bringing in our educational leaders and our organizational leaders, our employers, to make sure that's a good alignment. How do we establish live projects in classrooms? Regardless, so I was on a call with someone recently. Seems like I just live on Zoom calls lately, but they were talking about District C and the live projects or the type project base that they're doing with high schools. Well, community colleges and four-year colleges have been doing live projects for a number of years that I'm not sure the employers are aware of it, because we sometimes limit ourselves to working with just specific companies. And so when we talk about live projects, this is where particularly I have more experience with it at the community college and four-year university level. But this is where we take a class and we say, okay, we want you to work with a company on a particular project to enhance what they're doing. Several years ago, when I was still at AB Tech, my lead marketing instructor that taught marketing research came to me and said, hey, we have an opportunity to work with MBA students at Western Carolina with a local employer who is looking to become more international in what they're doing. And so they are looking at moving their company to this particular country as a live project. Is this something that we're interested in doing? And so my 2-year marketing research folks, under the leadership of my lead marketing instructor, worked with a group of MBA students from Western Carolina, working with this particular local company to develop a marketing plan to move their business or enhance their business to an international arena. And so those live projects are occurring. We just have to find avenues to do more jobs, more of that. Now, I will tell you the difficulty is usually having faculty members that have the time to outreach to these companies to say, hey, we're doing these different things. Another example was a local company. So when, and again, a lot of my recent experience has been with AP Tech, so I'm not trying to promote them, but when they developed their mobile web application program, we had several folks, local companies that said, hey, you know, I don't have the budget to really work with a marketing company or a design company around this, but we think a mobile app would be really good for our company. Can we do a live project with some of the students that are developing mobile apps in their classroom? And so that became a good partnership. So looking for those live projects. You can pull those down to the high school level. You can pull those down to middle school level, and really almost any level. We're hearing from a national point of view about workspaces and workspace labs in elementary and middle schools. And this is a design lab that's fairly cheap to produce, but kids are being creative and getting into understanding how to construct a product, how to market that product, how to keep accounting for that product in middle schools, in elementary schools. So there's a way to bring in live projects where we are getting involved with the employers and growing our pipeline internally, but also targeting some students that may not be in that traditional role. Identifying opportunity, establishing work-based learning opportunities, our job shadowing, our mentorship, our apprenticeships programs, getting more and more companies to offer those. Identifying employers who have expertise in the field of studies to become speakers. So bringing those folks into our classroom to speak, or into our Zoom chats to speak. I feel like after 30 years of being an educator and teaching in various discipline areas, that I have a broad understanding of a lot of industries. However, I also recognize that as a student looks at me, as students look at me as their instructor, they just see an educator. So even though I might know something about a topic, I always tend to try to bring in an external person from a company that can speak on that particular topic. And I have several goals around that. First of all, I'm wanting that external person to come in and talk to the class so that there's a connection. I also want that external business person to see what the students are learning. And I want the student then to learn from that organizational leader, as well as now have a contact with somebody at that specific company when they graduate. Now, I will tell you the last course that I taught as a full-time department chair was a contract negotiation course for our entrepreneurship majors. And I brought a local attorney in to talk about the pros and cons of contract negotiations from a legal point of view. And it's a local attorney, and it's a personal friend of mine. And after his presentation, I was walking him out of the building and back to his car, and he looked at me and he said, Fox, you know, I didn't understand the value of what students are learning at the 2-year colleges. He said, I was shocked some of the questions they gave me, and I was even thought he had mentioned that he was representing a local client, didn't give any names, around a lawsuit. And one of the students was very aware of the lawsuit and was able to ask specific questions that just blew his mind. And he said, I guess I didn't understand. First of all, I didn't even know you all had a contract negotiation course. And I didn't know that it was part of your entrepreneurship program. And so he said, that was just eye-opening for me. And he said, and that one student that asked really a lot of questions really should be looking at becoming a paralegal, because it was obvious she had done her research. So those are the kind of connections we're talking about. Provide tours. It could be virtual right now during the COVID-19 pandemic, and assist with financial support for programs. Going to the next slide. Another best practice and we'll get there. So I'll keep talking as Nathan gets his computer to go to the next slide. Sometimes when we do these remote hosting things, it does lock up on us.
I
So
apologize, it froze up on me, but I'm trying to go to the next one, so we'll keep working on it.
okay, not a problem. We're almost finished. So and I probably should just talk faster and not have these a lag in between slides. But a second or third, I guess, alignment best practice is to develop the development of inclusion strategy for non-majority populations. So again, I don't like the term minority. For those of you that are on the calls, I do a lot of work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Minority, when you define it, means less than. So I talk about majority and non-majority populations in education, in the workforce, but development of inclusion strategies for non-majority populations. So making sure that we are connecting with our low wealth communities, and not only our message and messaging, but how we reach those communities. We can't continue to operate per normal. We have to be able to look at how folks are getting their messaging, their information in their areas. Looking at our migrant and immigration population, looking at communities of color. Now, I will tell you, in the work that I do, some folks don't like the term community of color. So you may have picked up on one of the terms I used earlier. I said, as a male of darker hue. So a lot of times if I'm in plants doing inclusion work, I refer to communities of a darker hue. The community of color may have a stigma attached to it for older populations of darker hue, where they grew up in segregation, where you had for colors only and for whites only. And so you have to be really sensitive to some of the terminology. Looking at our re-entry populations, looking at veterans, looking at our disconnected youth and services that we provide to them, and then looking at our adult population. So those are kind of three just low-hanging fruit best practices that we can just start working on today. So how do we do that? We start by looking at some partnerships. Partner with community-based and community or college multicultural organizations to create attainment strategies for underserved students to guide them into non-traditional fields. So just briefly, I'll share with you. I have a niece that I am just so proud of. I'm proud of all my nieces and nephews. But because I have done diversity, inclusion, equity work, as well as being an educator for over 30 years, my sisters, particularly my sisters that have daughters, have grown up hearing my presentations, hearing my counsel when probably was not sought, around making sure that their children, my nieces and nephews, really looked at positioning themselves for gainful employment. So I have a niece right now, Black female of different darker hue, that is just graduated from, well, hadn't just graduated last year from Florida State, with a degree in marine biology. She was able to go through her 4-year college undergraduate degree, her 2-year master's degree, and actually her professor wanted her to go on to get a doctorate degree, and she wants to get out and work, but without paying a penny. So my sister and brother-in-law are just excited that she went through 6 years of post-secondary work without having to pay a penny. Now, part of that was understanding system biases at a young age, particularly my sister, and making sure that she and her husband always lived in areas where it had the better school districts. But to get my niece into the STEM programs, science, educational, technology, at a young age, so in middle school, as well as in high school. And so by the time she finished high school, she had called, now, not to take anything away from her, because she is a bright student, bright young lady, but because of getting in the better school districts, because of getting into the STEM programs early, and particularly science, and the lack of Black females in science programs, the College of Charleston gave her a 4-year scholarship, gave her allowance for off-campus living, gave her the best meal plan. When she went to Florida State, they paid for her 2-year master's degree. She, as a freshman at the College of Charleston, co-authored a paper with the #2 expert in the world around shark populations. He left the College of Charleston, went to Florida State, and recruited her to come to Florida State to get her master's. He is now trying to get her to go on to get a doctorate, and said, if you want to get a doctorate, we will find you the money to stay in the program. Now she's gotten out. She's working for a nonprofit, where their focus is getting other folks, particularly females of a darker hue, interested in the STEM program. So just understanding how that works. So can we go back one slide before we go to your turn? So as you think about that, think about some of the community-based organizations that you can connect with, or we need to learn more about what they're doing around working with non-traditional students. So Green Opportunities, most folks are familiar with that. Higher Powered Staffing, LLC, Philip Cooper, who may or may not be on the line today. My Community Matters is a community-based program that grew out of public housing in the Asheville area. My daddy taught me that. My sister taught me that. Riverfront Development Group, if you're not familiar with Catherine Mitchell and the work that she's doing around getting non-majority students interested in the STEM programs that lead to educational attainment, that leads to employment. She's doing some fantastic work. United Way of Asheville and Buncombe County and their Community Schools Initiative. Western, for the employers, Western North Carolina Diversity Engagement Coalition of organizations throughout our region, looking at how to recruit and retain diversified workforce in our area. The YMI, a cultural center, and Libby Cow's program, Youth Transformed for Life, I see one that I didn't put on here, Elevating Youth. Those of you that are familiar with the one a little work, where she works with high school students, getting them college ready. In the summer, she takes them on college tours, so that they know that the opportunities is there to get a college degree, but to hopefully come back to our region and be gainfully employed in this area. Okay, as we go to the next slide, take about 3 minutes and in the chat, list any other organizations that we should partner with that could assist in achieving the goals of educational attainment. So think about other organizations. And again, to refresh your memory, we talked about green opportunity, higher powered staffing, My Community Matters. My daddy taught me that. My sister taught me that. Riverfront Development Group, United Way, Western Carolina, North Carolina Diversity Engagement Coalition, YMI, Elevating Youth, and I'm sure I'm leaving out some organizations. Boys and Girls Club, thank you. Boys and Girl Club, MAHAC, and particularly their diversity initiative to get more non-majority students in the health field. Jacqueline Howland works with that program. El Centro, which works more with Hispanic Latino population. Keep those coming. Those are some really good partnerships. And again, I will tell you, as we're doing this work and we're collecting this data, this is information we'll be sharing with our work groups. Nathan Ramsey is leading our efforts with our educational and employment alignment community foundation. Thank you. Work group. So again, he's one of our key folks to feed some of this information to around that. UNCA works well with groups of youth. So again, some great things. Don't know if you have faith orgs, but they would be very helpful. Yes, Goodwill, good. Pisca Liga, Community Foundation Network System. So some really good organizations, and again, keep those coming. But we're towards the end, so I wanted to just hit some highlights. Now we're going to go through the next few slides. We're not going to read all of these, but I wanted to give you kind of just an example of some outreach that you can do, particularly if you are an employer. I will tell you, your connection sometimes as an employer when you're hiring gets lost sometimes when you're reaching directly out to educational institutions, their HR department. Their HR departments are usually overwhelmed with their workload. They don't know the specific programs. So the further you can drill down to create networking opportunities, the better you can grow your pipeline around the employers, your employer's needs. So just briefly looking at student organizations, AB Tech, Astro Buncombe Technical Community Colleges, look at and this is not the list of all of their student organizations, but this is a list of some potential organizations. If you're in health care and you're hiring, or not even hiring at this point, but you're wanting to establish a network, you wanted to establish some language and some dialogue, look at the list of health-related organizations, student organizations, where they're working with students in these degree areas, but coming out to those clubs as a speaker, letting them know the type of jobs that you're going to be hiring for in the future, having those students take their clubs, take a tour of your organizations, getting to know the faculty advisor for that club. And so a list of clubs there. And so again, if you're hiring, reach out to that advisor and say, hey, I see that you are the advisor for this particular club. Do you have any students in that area with this degree or whatever your criteria are that's looking for a job? So building those early to create that pipeline. Okay, if we go to the next slide, we see Blue Ridge Community College. And the list, and again, this is not a full representation of all of their programs, but I try to think about the folks that would be on our call this morning that might be hiring either now or in the future. So again, reaching out directly to the faculty advisor, and where you find that contact information, go to that community college or that four-year university's website, go to student organization or student life, and usually it will say clubs and or organizations. And when you click on a particular club, it usually will list the student advisor, their contact information in terms of their name and their email address or phone number. But I have found that's the better way to get directly to the type of folks that we're trying to hire in terms of the best and brightest, high producing. So you see Blue Ridge Community College has a number of clubs. If we go to the next slide, we see Brevard College has a list of clubs there that, again, you can pull from. So sometimes we forget that the clubs at our four-year colleges and university, private and public. Next one, Mars Hill. Again, a lot of student organizations there. So I just, again, I really, they had so many under their departmental area, departmentally affiliated. I didn't try to list those, but almost each department had several student organizations. Again, go straight to that college, to student life, to their club advisor. Our next slide, University of North Carolina, Asheville has several clubs. Again, I only pulled the ones that I felt like folks would be hiring from. Now, you have some political ones, et cetera, on there. Also, Warren Wilson College had a number of clubs. They had quite a few. And then Western Carolina has over 170 student organizations. So think about, from an employer point of view, creating partnerships, as you look at our partnership slides, of how you can start working with creating that pipeline of educational attainment that leads to gainful employment. So if you're an HR person or a company on the line, employer on the line, or an economic developer, here's some prime opportunities to start networking with these clubs and club advisors in specific workforce areas to start building a pipeline. We gave you a list of community-based organizations to start partnering with, to say, we want to be more diverse and inclusive. So let's contact some of these folks. And if you just Google some of those terms, my daddy taught me that, youth transforming leadership, their lead person will pop up. In most cases, you probably know some of these folks, but just hadn't made that connection of how do you as an employer, or how do you as an educator, or how do you working for local government or economic development or a chamber create that alignment of connecting the educational dots. We do a lot of good work in our area. We just don't always connect our resource dots around gainful employment. We sometimes get in our own little world that we sometimes forget to get out of our bubble or think larger. So I do a lot of work with nonprofits around strategic development and particularly fund development and grant writing. And sometimes I'll have a client that will say, well, we've gone after a couple grants, but we just, it's so competitive, we're not getting the money. And I'll say, but let's look at your work. your work is much larger than your specific program. So your work, even though that you might be, Boys and Girls Club, we'll just say, which is not one of my clients, but I just, since that they popped up recently in the chat, let's use them as an example. Let's say you're the Boys and Girls Club, and you're trying to find funding for your programs. Don't just think about your particular program. Your bigger program is, or your bigger life work is really trying to bring people out of poverty. You're trying to break that cycle of poverty. If you think about it from that point of view, look at all these other grant opportunities that may open up to you if your literary program or your entrepreneur development program or your professional soft skills business etiquette programs really has a portion of it of getting folks better jobs. And so thinking about it in a larger term. So that was a whole lot of information in 2 hours. We have 3 minutes. If we can open it up, anyone have any questions around the presentation or want to just share with us? So we're gonna make it where folks can unmute themselves. Or does anyone, go ahead.
Dr. Fox,
Yes.
this is Barbara Darby. I just want to mention that the Asheville Chamber has an initiative called the Inclusive Hiring Partners, and they're working with about 15 employers and quite a few community organizations, nonprofits, to refer this specific population to the project for work placement, but also for other services. So April Brown at the Chamber is in charge of the Inclusive Hiring Partner Project.
Wonderful. Thank you, Barbara, for sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
And see, that's why we're having this session. Is there some great work going on, but we've got to find out a better way of aligning all of our work and communicating that with each other. I was telling Nathan and Barbara, I was online with their workforce development awards program on December the 1st, and the outstanding work that they're doing that I was not aware of. And I'm thinking I do some work with them from a consultant point of view. So if I'm not aware of some of the good work that they're doing, how much of that information is getting out into the community about what they are doing. So just FYI, one of the things that we're doing with the My Future project is we're looking at bringing on someone to help us with marketing and branding and getting that message out there around all the good work that some of you all are doing. So if you have additional ideas and programs that you are working with, let Nathan or myself know about that, so that as we are developing our resource guide, your programs and your information can be in that guide. I see that we have Melissa with us also from the state level of My Future NC. And so Melissa and I now are setting up monthly conversations so that we can share with each other what they're doing at the state level, what we're doing at the regional level. I'm going to be, once we pull together our guide, sharing that with Melissa and My Future staff led by Cecilia Holden around resources out there, but also to get another set of eyes on our resource guide, where they may be aware of some programs at the state level or the national level that we are not aware of. I had a meeting last night, a Zoom meeting with our intern, looking at the guides that we got together thus far. And there's some great programs out there, but then the piece of that is going to be how do we communicate that with folks? So we'll take one more minute. I know that we're right at 11. but want to give folks an opportunity to chime in. I do want to thank the members of our steering committee that for my future that's on our call today. I see that Gene Lofton is still with us. Bill Cedarberg had to pop off. Of course, Nathan is with us, and I'm not sure if any of our other steering committee members are with us. Okay, so I'm not hearing any conversation, so have a great day. But again, continue to feed us some information, and we will continue to plug along with doing this work. Thank you all.